Well, loneliness is a worldwide health problem. Here in Australia, 1 in 4 people feel lonely at least 3 days a week. Nextdoor Australia has teamed up with leading researchers to launch the Kind Challenge. Kind, as in kindness, is next door to encourage people to get to know their neighbours and build community connections. For more, I'm now joined by Nextdoor Australia's country manager, Jennie Sager. Jennie, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me.
No worries. Thanks for having me here.
Firstly, can you tell me what exactly constitutes loneliness?
Yeah, I think it's really important to point out that there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. You can choose to be alone. You can say, I just want to have a day by myself. I'm a mom of 3 kids. I know that that's nice to have sometimes.
Of course, yeah.
But being lonely is totally different. That's not by choice. And that's really just having a feeling that you don't have anyone to turn to, that you're really alone in this space. And again, it's not by choice.
And is it something that's quite widespread in Australia?
Yes, so research has shown, specifically over the last year and a half, that Australia is in the middle of what's called a loneliness epidemic, where, as you said, 1 in 4 Australians say they're lonely at least 3 times a week. And it's actually being compared to smoking about 15 cigarettes a day and how bad that impact is on your personal health. And there's a lot of research into how if you can build strong social relationships, that can actually increase your health and well-being by more than 50%. So it really is an important issue.
Now, Nextdoor Australia is teaming up with lead researchers to conduct research on obviously this growing important matter. Can you take us through it?
Absolutely. So if you're not familiar with Nextdoor, so we're an online platform, an online neighbourhood hub that's all about connecting you to people in your neighbourhood and your surrounding neighbourhoods. Now, we name and address verify every single person that joins the platform so that you know that you're actually talking to a true, valid neighbour, which is very different to other platforms. And so we have this unique opportunity to really dive into how to combat social isolation and loneliness at a neighborhood level, and how kind of simple acts of kindness can potentially have a big impact. And that's why we've teamed up with researchers in the US, the UK, and Australia to commission this first of its kind global study. So here in Australia, we're working with Swinburne University and Dr. Michelle Lim, who's a real expert in the space of loneliness in Australia. And we'll be looking again at, what you can do. Is it saying hello to somebody you don't know already in your neighborhood, maybe bringing a neighbor a cup of coffee or checking on an elderly neighbor, and the impact that those small acts actually have on loneliness and social isolation.
It's wonderful a topic to research, of course. It's just so important. Is it a case, though, that we're not really aware just how big of a problem it is in Australia? I mean, you said it has the same mortality rates as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Is it just the education's not quite out there?
Absolutely. I think sometimes people think of loneliness as more of a mental issue and not as much of a physical issue, but loneliness affects everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a teenager, and actually Dr. Michelle Lim has specifically done a lot of research into how it affects youth and that younger age group, but also, 20s, 30s, 40s, all the way up into your older years. Now, you could be a mom who's just had her first child and is lonely at home. You could be a teenager who's off at uni for the first time and doesn't know anyone. You could be a newly found retiree and empty nester. And so it really affects a huge proportion of the population, and that's why it's so important that we look into it.
Now, part of this, you've also launched the Kind Challenge. What is that? Take us through it.
Yes, so the Kind Challenge is, as you said, stands for Kindness is Nextdoor, and we're really a platform that's all about positivity and cultivating this kinder world where everyone has a neighbor and a neighborhood that they can rely on. So participants will be asked to do these small acts of kindness. So again, simple things like offering a neighbor a lift down to the shops, and the research team will work with the participants on this. I should stress that there's no personal data being shared with Nextdoor. So once somebody enrolls in the study, it all gets handed to the research team, and we don't get any personal data or health data or anything. So it's fully operated by the research team. However, we did work with the research team on trying to figure out what those little acts of kindness should be. And so they will determine the ultimate list, but we did have some say into things that we already see people doing. So arranging coffee groups or starting a walking group, working together as a community to maybe do something like clean up the beach in your neighborhood. And then the simple things too, like just asking someone out for a cup of coffee or literally just saying hello to somebody that you don't know.
Basically, basic things that we probably don't realise would actually make a big difference. Jennie, just finally, have you got any tips for people who perhaps are at home feeling a little bit lonely themselves?
Absolutely. Look, everyone has a different level of comfort, I would say, with what they're willing to do. But I think it's important that we all remember that it doesn't take a huge act. now we're all so addicted to our phones, we're staring at our phones. If you take the train or bus to work, nobody's talking to each other, and a little thing can have a big impact. So sometimes when I'm on the train, I just say hello to somebody, and you just see their face light up. My 6-year-old loves to just say hello, how are you, to everybody he sees on the street. And it's a really interesting social experiment, because some people just walk right past, and other people take their headphones out and go, oh my gosh, hello, how are you? So it is about those little acts. With people that are feeling lonely at home, one great thing about Nextdoor is that you come online and we give you kind of a nudge to open up to those around you, but our hope is that it translates into a true meaningful connection offline. So what happens a lot on the platform is you literally just see somebody say something like, hey, I don't really have a lot of friends in the area. Does anyone want to go for a coffee? And you see 100 people reply. Or, I'm actually feeling a little bit lonely today. Is anybody around? And because you all live in the same neighborhood, people reply and say, hey, I'm home too. Like, let's go for a walk. Or, do you like chess? Let's have a game of chess. And we see this in every single neighborhood across Australia, which is amazing. And I think, especially right now with the crises that we've come out of between the bushfires and now coronavirus, people don't know who to trust. And so they turn to that local community around them. And so now is such an important time to rely on that network and make sure you're getting the true information. And we're obviously working with the Department of Health as well to make sure that our users know the facts and know what's happening at a neighborhood level. But if you are feeling lonely at home, like, reach out to those around you, and nobody is going to turn their back on you. And Nextdoor is a great way to do that.
Some absolutely wonderful advice, and all the best with the research. Jennie Sager, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.